Alrighty, welcome to Precious Poetry. So I'm going to take you on a little tour of my poetry blog. I'm going to scroll down here for a bit and show you where I started this down in 2018. October of 2018 is when I started my poetry blog. Now, few of you may know that I actually published a book of poetry back in 2008. And so this is all the poetry, or some of the poetry. I shouldn't say all the poetry, but everything past that. So in 2018, I went through some of my archives that I didn't publish in Still Broken, and I decided to put some of those in this blog. Now, most of my poetry isn't in my book, and most of my poetry isn't in the blog. So that tells you that there's a lot of poems out there that have been put into archives just for my reading. Isn't that exciting? Because that's what poets do. Poets write, and it's a way of purging. Poetry is a way of purging your soul, purging your grief, purging your pain, purging your angst. Everything comes out when it's a beautiful it's a gift, I guess. Some people would call it a gift. I just like the idea of having something where I can be honest in myself and with myself. And that's what poetry has done for me over the years. So when you come up here, now, if you open up just on thepreciouspoet.blogspot.com is the website. And if you come into that, you're going to be able to scroll down and just find a list of all the, like it's going to go all the way down to, I don't know, 5 or 6 poems. And you can just find them that way. And then when you get to the end of the list, you can go down and there's going to be a thing here which says older posts. And if you hit that, you can keep going. So that's one way you can go and read if you want. If you're that excited about poetry and my poetry, you can go down and read that way and just go down to the end and scroll down, and you can go to older posts, and then it has newer posts as well. If you hit the home button, it brings you back up to the top again. But I've done a little bit of navigation ease in this, so you don't have to do that way. So let's go with, let's start in poetry pages. Now the posts in the blog are the poems themselves, but I've also done pages, and the pages have some write-ups, but they also introduce you to some indexes. So I'm going to start you off with some indexes. So if you go down to poetry pages, you just scroll down here, it comes right under my profile. It says Index of Precious Poetry. So let's click on that. And that comes up with a list of all the poems in alphabetical order that I have on my blog. That's right, there's a few there. So you can go and you can click on, let's go see if we can find something here. How about the poet's bio? I read that at the Poet Fest, or the Edmonton Poetry Festival. That's one of the poems I wrote for that, and that brings you right into the poem. So if you go back, click on your back arrow there, and it shows now that that's highlighted that in black. Now I've read that one, right? So if you want to go through and find another one, you can go through and find another one. We can highlight snow. So, and there's snow. And in every poem on my blog, I do the poem first, and then I do a picture, and then I have a poet's note with the date that I wrote the poem. So that's the format that I've done for each of the poems on my blog. And I'm not exactly asking everybody that they need to find a way and navigate through the poem out of my interpretation. Every poet I know understands that maybe somebody else is probably going to get a different interpretation of their poem. Their interpretation is precious to them, but when they release their poems out to the world, they understand that they're giving this gift to people to find themselves in their poems. So your interpretation matters to my poetry, but my interpretation or my thoughts come after the poem if you're interested in that. That's what that's for. Alrighty, let's go back to the next index we have here. Let's go to index of, and this is always going to be visible, so you're always going to be able to see this side page. So let's go to the index of grief poems. Now it's a list, it's a narrower list, but of grief poems. I've written a lot of grief poems, and most of my writing really comes out of the darkness and the pain and the sorrow and the sadness and the tragedy of my life. I'm going to warn you about that right now. If you're into the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 4 wing 5. So if that explains anything to you, there's a lot of openness when it comes to the hard times in my life, and that comes out of my poetry, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very glad that there's a place that I can go into my blog and my poetry and get that out. So it's a little bit more of the pages here. So I have a big note here under my indexes. It says, "Please don't edit my poetry when I'm dead." So this is me writing a little bit of a blurb here, asking that once I'm gone, if anybody decides to do something with my poetry, that they will respect it. And there is a woman by the name of Emily Dickinson. She didn't get her poetry published until after she was dead. Like, she had maybe a few poems published in some magazines and stuff, but her work in books and stuff in a serious way did not get published until after she was dead. And she had people that decided to put even punctuation and changes and just little things they thought would accentuate her poetry. Well, that's not what a poet really wants. Maybe if you're writing a novel, maybe if you're writing a manual for technical manual or stuff like that, you would love someone to come in and edit your work. I don't think I'm the only poet that definitely, if I'm in the realm of Emily Dickinson, I will say poetry is not something people want edited, and definitely the poet doesn't want it edited. So that became very clear in the work of Emily Dickinson, and it's clear for me. I don't like my poetry edited. I will edit my poetry. I just don't want anybody else messing with it. So, and that includes punctuation. Okay, punctuation is part of the poetry, and the poet has a special style in their punctuation. So if you move a period or put a period or take away a period, you're changing the poem. That's how that works. So that's what this is all about. If you want to go and read that sometime. And then I have some more pages here. I've got some updates on, like I say, I wrote the Still Broken book 14 years ago. And things have changed since then in my life. And so I just wanted to put an update in there. And I actually have a section here called Still Broken Poems Explained. The photos, not the poems, sorry, the photos. When I wrote the book, I never explained the photos. So if you've got my book and you want to know what the photos in there and the stories behind the photos, there it is right there. So there's all the photos and the stories behind the photos. That's something I didn't put in the book, so I have that accessible here on the blog, which is kind of interesting. If nobody's ever dived into that, that's there. And then I have a letter that I wrote 11 years later to the readers of Still Broken. So that's there. And then I have some articles here that I wrote to poetry. What am I supposed to do with the gift now? Sad poetry. Is there a place for it? So when I want to write something about the poems, but not that aren't poems, but I get some inspiration to write something, then I'll put those in the pages. So I have the bio here, Ruby Newman, you can click on that as well. And then comes the poetry archive. So that's another easy way, aside from the indexes, if you want to see by month, what I've done in a certain month, and you can click on the month and you can see in June of 2021, I wrote Kissed by the Creator. So you can see it that way as well. So that's a little bit of a tour of Precious Poetry. And I'm going to take you into my next blog. And the way I can do that is a link right here in my Precious Poetry. So each of my blogs have a link to the other blog. So if you're in one, you have a link to get to the other blog. But I'm going to do that in another video. So I will just show you right here that when I hit that button, that gets me into Ruby Gets Real. Have a good day. Bye.